Imagine it's January of 2000. Meet two investors at this pivotal moment. Jack, who's fully invested in the S&P 500, and Jill, who's diversified across different funds and asset classes. Over the next 10 years, Jack and Jill would live through one of the roughest investing periods in modern history, a period known as the lost decade. This is the story of what happened to them and the lessons that you can learn to protect your future nest egg. For those who don't know me, I've been investing for over 15 years now. I've made almost every investing mistake that you can think of, and I make these videos so you don't make those mistakes and share what has actually worked for me. Anyway, the lost decade refers to the period between 2000 and 2009, a stretch where US stocks essentially lost value over a 10-year period. It was a perfect storm of events. In the early 2000s, the dot-com bubble burst, where tech stocks that had soared in the late 1990s crashed, wiping out trillions of dollars. Then came the 9/11 terrorist attack in 2001, and just when the economy had started to recover mid-decade, the 2008 global financial crisis struck. Housing market collapsed, Lehman Brothers went under, and the S&P 500 plummeted by 50% from its peak in 2007. By the end of 2009, the results were grim for Jack's S&P 500 portfolio. In fact, $1 invested in the S&P 500 at the start of 2000 was still worth about $1. Actually, it was worth less than $1 10 years later. Now, here's the crazy part. If you adjust that flat return for inflation, Jack's purchasing power actually dropped. It dropped significantly. Jill's journey was different. From the start, Jill did not put all her faith in the S&P 500 alone. She remembered an old saying, diversify. Jill's portfolio included not just US large cap stocks, but it also included small cap stocks, international stocks, some bonds. That made all the difference. When the US tech stocks crumbled, some of Jill's other holdings held firm or even thrived, and small cap value stocks quietly doubled or even tripled in value. So the question is, what can you do to protect yourself from a lost decade-like scenario in the future? One powerful approach that seasoned investors like Jill use is the bucket strategy. Think of your portfolio as divided into 3 individual buckets, and each bucket has a specific purpose and time horizon. This strategy is about organizing your money in a way that can ride out years of bad market returns without derailing your long-term goals. Here's how it works. Bucket 1 is your cash reserves for short-term needs. This is your safety net. It's filled with very safe and liquid assets like cash, money market funds, short-term CDs, and treasury bills that you can tap at a moment's notice. Typically, you would keep about 2 to 3 years of living expenses in retirement, or enough to cover any income drought for a few years. The goal here is stability. This bucket won't earn much, but it won't lose value if the stock market crashes. In Jack and Jill's story, this bucket is what would have saved Jack from having to sell stocks in 2002 and then again in 2008. It is the cash that he could have lived on when the markets were down. This, by the way, is a true story. Bucket 2 is your medium-term investments for a 3 to 5 year time horizon. This bucket is for the next phase of needs, roughly years 3 to 5 of expenses or goals. You don't need this money immediately, but you can't afford to gamble it too much either. So bucket 2 holds moderate risk, income producing investments. The idea is to earn a bit more return than cash to keep up with inflation, but still maintain relative stability. If the markets are decent, you could draw from this bucket after you use up bucket 1. If markets are terrible, bucket 2 is what provides a buffer once bucket 1 is exhausted. Then bucket 3 is your long-term growth for a 5+ year time horizon. This is the engine of your portfolio, the stocks and growth assets that you won't touch for many years. Bucket 3 contains high-risk, high-reward investments. Think of index funds, growth stocks, international equity funds, maybe even some higher yield assets. Since you don't plan to withdraw from this bucket for many years, it has time to ride out the market volatility. The goal here is to provide the growth that will outpace inflation and increase your wealth over the long run. In Jill's case, this bucket held her diversified mix of global stocks. And yes, it did fall from 2000 to 2002 and then again from 2008 to 2009, but because she wasn't dependent on it for immediate cash, she could have left it alone to recover. And recover it did. By the end of 2010, many of these investments bounced back even stronger. Bucket 3 really is your future. It is where your money grows so that 10, 15, 20 years down the line, you would have beaten inflation and increased your net worth. So if you revisit 2008, the year where the stock market fell over 37%, and if you were retired and following the bucket strategy, you would not need to touch your stocks, which is bucket 3, at all during the crash. You would draw your living expenses from bucket 1, which is cash, and effectively riding out the storm on the cash that you set aside. This is exactly what Jill did. Jack, by contrast, had no such plan. He was forced to sell shares in his S&P 500 funds just to meet his expenses, and this locked in losses which shrank his future growth. Then, in today's world, some investors argue that dividend stocks can replace bonds as a source of stability and income. And while dividends can certainly provide cash flow, they are not a true substitute for bonds, especially during economic crisis. History has shown that in truly terrible years like 2008, dividend stocks got crushed alongside the rest of equity market. Many blue chip dividend stocks, often seen as a safe bet, saw their values slashed, and some companies even cut or suspended the dividends altogether. Meanwhile, bonds, particularly high-quality government and investment-grade bonds, held strong and helped keep portfolios afloat. This is why bonds historically have played a crucial role in preserving capital when stocks are in a free fall. The bucket strategy ensures that you have exposure to bonds and other stable assets to weather out any storms effectively. Here's the long-term treasuries right next to the large-cap US stocks. You can see how stable the bond market was throughout the last decade. It just proves my point that bonds have a role in an overall diversified portfolio. Then here's the Barclays US Aggregate Bond Index, showing that bonds achieved a positive annualized return during the 2000 to 2009 period. The last decade of 2000 to 2010 taught a generation of investors some hard lessons. Markets don't always go up in a straight line. In fact, they can go nowhere for 10 years and test the faith of some of the most seasoned investors. So, again, what does this mean for you? It means that you need to plan ahead. Young investors might feel that a lost decade is just history, something that happened to their parents or their grandparents. But here's the reality. No one knows what the next decade or two will bring. Markets don't go up in a straight line forever, and another period of stagnant returns could absolutely happen again. If your entire portfolio is tied up in just one investment like the S&P 500 and you are, let's say, 2 years from retirement, well, you're taking a massive risk. Diversification is less about fear and more about preparation. However, if you're in your 20s or 30s, you still have a lot of time to recover from market downturns. So maybe all this information is not as relevant to you. I'm in my 30s and bonds are a very small part of my overall portfolio. My bucket 1 is a couple of CDs, some cash. My bucket 2 is almost empty, but my bucket 3 is full. However, as I get older, the plan is to start filling the other 2 buckets as well. You don't want to risk a major loss right before you need the money. And that's where the bucket strategy shines. It helps you protect your savings while still allowing for growth. If you enjoy content that helps you avoid financial disasters like Jack's portfolio, hit the like and subscribe button.